Hi, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Robin Runge, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the Civil Rights and Social Justice section this year. It's quite an opportunity as a part of that to be able to host these chair chats. As you know, I use she, her pronouns. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. And as you have probably figured out at this point, what I love doing is lifting up my phenomenal friends who are trailblazing and changing the world and introducing them to you, and learning from them real time about the work they're doing to make the world better for all of us. And mean that. And so today is no exception. It is a thrill and an honor and a privilege to welcome my friend. Most importantly, no, I'm kidding. It's not the most important part. Marcy Karin, who is the Jack and Lovell Allender Professor of Law and the Director of the Legislation Civil Rights Clinic at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clarke School of Law, where she teaches students on reflective legislative skills and ethical issues and effective lawyering. Through the clinic, she also teaches a myriad of other courses I happen to know, including employment law, employment discrimination, gender and sexual orientation under the law, reproductive justice, disability law, and I hope someday a class on menstruation in the law, because I think that is what we need, because this is such a huge issue that is impacting more than half of the world's population today. And that is what she's actually here to talk with us about. Really importantly and relevantly, she spent 2023 in Scotland as a Fulbright Distinguished Scholar at the University of Edinburgh, where she actually focused on this very issue and learning about the great work that's happening in Scotland related to menstruation and the law and the menstruation cycle. So I just can't express my appreciation to you, Marcy, for being here, for giving your time today, and for your advocacy on this issue. You've been doing it. It's hot now. I'm just going to say it, but you've been doing it before it got hot, and it really have changed my life for the better here in the District of Columbia. And as a citizen of the United States, I have privileges and rights because of your advocacy around menstruation, and millions of us do. And so I would love to learn more from you today and have the folks tuning in today just, what am I talking about? Why is this so important? So thank you. And why don't we start there? Help us understand why menstruation and the law, why is it a legal issue at all, right? And then let's talk about some specific examples of the fruits of your advocacy.
Sure. Well, that was just a really bloody good intro, so thank you. And one of the things that I unsuccessfully try to do is make period jokes whenever possible in order to help destigmatize the topic. Because the truth is, when I became a law professor, if you had told me that I would become an expert in the menstrual cycle and its cessation in the law, I would have laughed at you because I didn't even say the words period in public, and I didn't know what really menopause was or what people's lived experiences with it were. And so, this is absolutely a legal issue because of the way that systems are set up that cause obstacles and place barriers in the way of people who experience the menstrual cycle. And so there is a role for law to play in removing those barriers, whether it is at work, at school, in terms of sitting for exams, in terms of economic security or housing, or once you're detained. There's just so many ways. And because it is such a stigmatized topic, even though it is changing, and here in the district, some students and I helped get new menstrual education requirements, in part because no one is really comfortable talking about this.
Mhm.
So, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, right, the menstrual cycle is a process that's caused by hormones that are released by an ovary. Essentially, those hormones cause a buildup in the lining in the uterus, and about halfway through what's called the menstrual cycle, an egg can be released. Essentially, right, it leads to either an egg being fertilized, and and implanted, and pregnancy, or the shedding of the uterine lining. People colloquially call that a period. On average, it lasts for 4 to 7 days a cycle. A cycle tends to be 21 to 30-ish days, but it changes over the course of people's life. And while periods themselves are not disabilities, there isn't really a normal period, and there are some conditions that relate to the menstrual cycle that can rise to the level of a disability, whether it's PCOS or endo or other stuff. And so, I'll just end this part by saying, right, knowing some of these terms matters if you are a worker, if you are a person who menstruates, if you are an educator, if you are a member of society, because so many people experience the menstrual cycle and its cessation and don't really understand menarche or postmenopause or anywhere in between.
Yeah. No, Marcy, thank you for that and that level of detail and your really incredible efforts to destigmatize this, because as you were talking, and I bet other people are thinking the same thing. I remember when I was in high school and college, and I had female identifying classmates who missed days, who could not get out of bed. And yet the shame was so significant that only their closest friends would they actually disclose, right, the cause. But it was so debilitating, whether it be headaches or pain, that they were actually missing and getting, bad grades because of it, right? And this was not an ability issue, but there was no, and we didn't speak of it. I confess I was a part of this, right? Like
Yeah.
we did everything we did. And I had other friends who were incredibly sick and went to class, right? And struggled in those spaces. And I remember too the amount of money my entire life, but best especially then, that we spent on pads and tampons, because, and it's like, these are some of the most people don't realize this is like really expensive stuff. It's a completely understood piece of this. And so I just flashed back on that when you were talking. And then I absolutely know coworkers, female identifying coworkers in my life, who ran out of sick days and got fired, or in the middle of the day didn't have what they needed, and there was nothing available in their workspace. And so they ended up, trying to find someone who could support them or help them get home. And again, in the middle, like, and so these, it's debilitating on so many different levels. And yet people who menstruate, it's another example, and I really see this a part of gender bias and discrimination, of how we have been forced to keep all of these parts of who we are and how we function in the world, um, a secret. We're not allowed to speak of it, which means then we don't understand what's happening to our bodies, and then we don't even know who would we go to seek support about that. And so this is why I just appreciate that entry point, because we don't talk enough about the fact that this is a natural part of life. And that then there are also medical conditions related to it that are really significant that we're actually ignoring because of the shame. I had friends who later discovered they had what I'm going to say it wrong.
Endometriosis. Yes.
Endometriosis. And like, this is like for years, and excruciating pain. And again, missing work, missing school, missing opportunities for promotion if they're able to hang on to their jobs. And then they learned later on that this was like a legitimately really dangerous, life-threatening condition that needed treatment, but that they had not known that because they were so ashamed because we're supposed to just handle it. We're supposed to take, what we now call Advil, and we called it something when I was a kid, and just, keep functioning. And yet systemically, that means a whole set of the population is not meeting their opportunities. So I think most relevantly for this conversation, I'd love to move into some really concrete examples beyond of the law and like how you're changing the law's understanding of this and addressing this. So some work that I know you did with a couple of your colleagues around ensuring access to the bar examination. So again, this is a huge, huge issue. And I remember this vividly when I took the bar exam. And so please talk about that advocacy and what the result of that has been.
Yeah, in the summer of 2020, when the bar exam went remote, along with the rest of the world, some bar takers actually were using social media to talk about some of their concerns and the problems that they were seeing. And one of the problems that they were talking about became hashtag bloody barpocalypse, which is really hard to spell. However, there's real power behind the storytelling that we saw from recent alums of ours that were taking the bar exam, who were concerned about access to bathrooms, who were concerned about needing to disclose, right, this normal biological process that doesn't always rise to the level of a formal accommodation,
Mhm.
right? And so that led to Margaret Johnson at the University of Baltimore and Liz Cooper at Fordham and I working with teams of students over the course of a couple of years and developing a model policy for boards of law examiners to remove some of that systemic sort of harassment and bias that was preventing some people who menstruated from being comfortable during the exam, from being able to sit for the bar exam. That summer, it was often in front of a computer, but since then, in person, ensuring that our profession at the very start of it doesn't exclude people who menstruate because they don't want to carry around an orange pad, right, in a clear plastic bag and to
Mhm.
disclose to other people. And so, you know, we've been very optimistic that we've seen some changes, right, based on that model policy and advocacy by students and others. There's still some room to grow, but we now have boards of law examiners across the country using the words menstruation, right?
Mhm.
We have examiners that don't look like me or you, right, talking about periods. We're not yet at the point where everyone has access to the bathroom at the time that they need it, right? But
Mhm.
we are at the point in many jurisdictions where it's okay to acknowledge that you have a menstrual cycle and that your biology might need something different than someone else's in order to be able to focus on the actual point of the exam, right? In terms of being able to demonstrate your knowledge and mastery of the skills and substance of our profession.
Mhm.
So it's one of those areas where, you know, almost overnight, the lived experiences that people were putting forward of being harassed by proctors, of being embarrassed by carrying products in public, of potentially outing themselves as someone who menstruates if they don't identify as female publicly, right? All of those things we surveyed, we studied, and then we got to work to try to change the law to be more welcoming so that bias doesn't exist moving forward.
No, it's just, it's so unbelievably amazing. And I just want to say, like, I think we're at a point now where I know I slightly more than 50% of the people in law schools now identify as female. And
Yeah,
so I just, and that's in our lifetime, that shift, right? And so this is why this is so significant,
yeah.
because it is actually addressing the needs of the majority of probably people sitting for the bar today.
Yeah, and you know, we were hearing stories of recent alums of ours and others who were suppressing their periods with medication, right? Out of the fear
Yeah.
of, right, leaking and getting harassed in front of people they don't know, or just being uncomfortable or in
Mhm.
pain, right? And that's not okay, right?
Yeah.
That is not a profession I want to be a part of. I want to be a
Right.
part of a diverse, inclusive profession that doesn't let someone's biology be the reason that they can't take an exam.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just amazing. Thank you so much for that advocacy. Um, Now I would just love to shift into an area where you really are the leading expert, which is the increasing understanding of the need for workplace protections for people who menstruate, both domestically and globally. I know that you've written a seminal law review article on this and are really raising our awareness and gotten the federal government to really recognize this as a form of sex discrimination. So help us enter that world, right? And understand how this manifests and describe some of your advocacy in that area.
Sure. Well, as we've already talked about, so many people that are part of working age America and across the world are of menstruating age, right? And shocker, periods don't stop when you go into work or when you're sitting right in front of a computer if you're working remotely. And so as a result of that, there are needs for people who menstruate at work. There are needs for accommodations, right? Things, actual things like menstrual products, right? But also, toilets that have disposal bins or running
Mhm.
water, or if you wear a uniform, the most common uniform, yeah, color is khaki colored. You know what's really easy to see when you wear khaki colored uniform? Blood, right? And menses when it leaks. And so there are sometimes needs for uniform modifications or water or things that don't cost very much money. Letting a teacher use a fan if they are in perimenopause or menopause, right? And experiencing hot flash, right?
Mhm.
And so things, spaces, but also the time to use those things, right? So a break time to go to the bathroom or to go
Mhm.
find a product if you are working for an employer that's not providing them, or to take a minute to close your eyes in a wellness room, right? To recenter yourself, which has been demonstrated to be helpful if you're in perimenopause and just need a second, and are having some problems sleeping. Or to be able to work in dignified ways where you can control, right, some of your duties in a way that you aren't being surveilled, right? So
Yes.
that workers aren't counting how many times you go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
or that they're not, taking your menstrual data, right, for health purposes in ways that can be really controlling and problematic given where we are in the world today. And then, outside of accommodations, there's sex discrimination and age discrimination and disability discrimination and
Mhm.
other forms of intersectional discrimination that are really about, right, how can we use law to support people who menstruate or were former menstruators so that their cycle and its cessation, right, doesn't become the reason for discrimination at work or for harassment. The stigma of this topic doesn't lead to additional harm when you're at
Yeah.
work. And so all of that is really important, as is the education, both about these needs and why someone might need an accommodation, as well as, just understanding why someone, you should let them go to the bathroom break, right? Or
Yeah.
take a bathroom break, or if someone has leaked, allow them to tie something around their waist, or to take a second, right, to go and change somewhere, or because the state of menstrual education in this country and around the world is not so great, right? It's not always intentional, right? So
Mhm.
someone doesn't
Mhm.
always understand that, like, there's a case where a manager said, well, my wife didn't have hot flashes, you'll be fine, right?
Right.
Like, that's not real, right? But we have to do better in terms of educating our HR staff, of our coworkers, of why someone might need to carry water,
Yeah.
right? Inexpensive, right? Makes the world of difference in terms of letting people be connected to the workplace. And I'll say, it's not just about products, right? In order to get to truly allowing people to have the economic security so they're not, worried about their health or their job, we also need, right, managers and CEOs and elected officials to talk about menstruation, to take a product out of their sleeve so it's not hidden, to
Mhm.
actually just let us know, like, it is okay to talk about menstruation or menopause here. It is okay for you to tell me what your needs are related to perimenopause, because you might be experiencing unexpected bleeding differently for the first time in your 40s and you're figuring it out, or to go to a doctor for this, right?
Yeah.
It's the same as so many other biological things that employers are not always, right, well equipped to handle.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important, is recognizing that it's not necessarily intentional, it's cultural. And that we're all contributing to a culture, right? That continues, frankly, to oppress people who experience this. And so we need to help people get the tools. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd want it in every personnel manual, right? So that people see
Yes.
that, if you need to take leave, here are the permissible reasons for taking it. And on the list is, things related to your cycle, right? And that, when it talks about your rights as a person with a disability, that if your health condition rises to this level related to menses, right, that's good. And we have to help people see themselves in their policies and in their laws. And so I think that's a great segue to some of, I think, the most amazing recent wins that I'm aware of that you've had, in your advocacy. So we recently saw the issuance of the Pregnancy Worker Fairness Act regulations. And so for folks who don't know, maybe you can just help people understand, what am I talking about? What is that law? And why is it important? And then your advocacy to have it really recognized in the context of prohibiting discrimination and providing accommodations for people who are pregnant, how menstruation was recognized as a part of those protections.
Yeah. So April was a big month here for getting the US government to say the words,
Yeah.
right? To use the words to help us connect some of these dots, right? That sex discrimination, right, is menstrual discrimination, is menopause discrimination. And the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act is a relatively new law that requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations for pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions. Myself and some others, we asked the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to ensure that the menstrual cycle and its cessation and related conditions are included as part of, right, the protections for what is available, and what the qualifying conditions are in terms of who can get an accommodation. And menstruation was included for the first time, right, in regulations as part of a non-exhaustive list, right, of confirming, right, what the text so clearly states, right, because menstruation is connected to pregnancy, right? The menstrual cycle is part and parcel with the reproductive system. And so it's really important that these often low cost accommodations, or no cost accommodations in some cases, can now be provided when these regulations take effect in just a few days or weeks now.
Yeah.
Yeah, really,
Amazing.
really big deal. And the confirmation as part of the preamble as well, that Title VII, right, covers menstruation and related conditions, is a really big deal. And so just that was the first, not the last one yet, though.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, I know we're talking about the workplace, but I also just want to lift up, we recently had new regulations issued for interpretation of Title IX in the education context, right? So Title IX prohibits sex discrimination in the education context, and they just issued new regulations. And I know you did some advocacy there as well that I think is parallel. And you and I talk about this all the time, that our educational settings are both workplaces
Yes.
and places of education. And so it's really important to have parity, right? It's really important to have parity on these issues. So if you want to share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Title IX regulations that also came out in April clearly state, right, that sex discrimination includes menstrual discrimination and menopause discrimination, that it can be based on sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, or pregnancy and related conditions. And it doesn't have to be on all of them, right? That
Yeah.
these are can be full stop discrimination on the basis of sex if you are dealing with discrimination on the basis of menopause, perimenopause, menstruation, or other intersecting components. That's a really big deal for the reason that you were just mentioning, that it does cover both students as well as workers. And there had been some state guidance, but it is the first federal sort of protection that clearly uses the words menopause and perimenopause in this very clear way. There had been some confusion, not because the text of the statutes isn't clear. Sex is clearly covered, right? Disability is clearly covered. Age is clearly covered, right? But that now for people who aren't, legislative lawyers who always know to read the text and think about interpretation issues, right? We are starting to see the federal government, right, step up in ways that have already been happening in other places around the world and say, hey, this is clear. It can be sex discrimination, right? For Title IX. The EEOC also issued sexual harassment guidelines recently, right? Same thing. For the first time, you have an example about intersectional gendered ageism, right? That talks about a worker with menopause, right? Along with so many other examples, right, of sexual harassment, demonstrating what can be hostile work environment, demonstrating what can be, right, illegal under Title VII and under Title IX. And it's so important, and we're not done yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to lift those things up. This is moving mountains. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but thinking that some of the people that you were reaching in your advocacy who issued these guidelines and these regulations are themselves in menopause. So this is a very good example, not exclusively. We have wonderful male allies. I just need to say this. But I'm sitting here thinking about the fact that the chair of the EOC, Charlotte Burrows, is a Black woman, right? The vice chair of the EOC is a woman, right? The head of the Civil Rights Office in the Department of Education, is a woman, right? This is not insignificant because they see themselves in this. And so this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, and I'll add, it's not related to regulations, but the first sort of public um, campaign that I saw about the menopause transition at work and menstruation at work was actually at the Department of Labor's Women's Bureau. It doesn't
Mhm.
surprise me, right, that they are hearing, right, and want to recognize, right, that this is happening and we
Yeah.
need to talk
Yeah.
about it. And we need to talk about like some of the menstruation related conditions disproportionately impact Black, Latino, and Native American menstruators more than others. And so
Yeah.
this issue has layers, and it is important, right, that we ensure that we are doing what we can to support all of these experiences, right, at work in a way that also, right, keeps us connected and provides employers with returns on investment for investing, right, in their workers so that they don't lose this aging sort of set of really qualified workers.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you lifting up the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor, and they are really. I saw a webinar that they had with you and several others, including people who work with employers, which I thought was so wonderful to hear from employers how they're doing this. It's not just enough to not discriminate, right? So this is what you've really been articulating, Marcy, is it's not just enough. Like I remember I had girlfriends in college who were told by coaches when they showed up and they had their period that they couldn't play that game that day. I mean, and that's clearly a violation, I believe, right? In our understanding of denying equal access to opportunities and activities in higher ed, and sports is where Title IX was first interpreted, but clearly it's about anything. If you have a teacher denying access or harassing you, right, based on that status, that's one thing, is to prohibit that. It's another thing, right, to have employers providing access to free products, right, to making sure, like you were saying, that nobody's going to give you a hard time if you get up to use the bathroom more than you did before, or need a rest. I mean, all the things you've just mentioned,
Yeah.
and those are all the things that these laws are saying are necessary. And that if you don't, and I just, so it's two sides of the same coin. Does that make sense? Like there's the don't do negative things to people who experience these, but also welcome them into your spaces so that they can be the best people they can be.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more element for any employer lawyers that are listening as one formerly myself, right? The Occupational Safety and Health Act requires bathroom access,
Yeah.
right? So some of these other laws, right, are really just giving an additional hook where if OSHA was, or the OSH Act was enforced in the way that it should be, especially for example, women in non-traditional jobs, right, you wouldn't be seeing, the need for unions to negotiate for these, or you wouldn't be seeing, right, some of these problems and concerns and litigation over bathroom breaks in other areas because people are just fulfilling the basic safety and health obligation of providing access to a toilet.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, I just thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I'm just already so appreciative of how my life is lived for the better because I have these protections. And I've learned from you that there are other countries that actually provide female identifying folks with leave from work for menopause. I mean, I just and that is really just phenomenal. But thank you for your time today, Marcy. Thank you for your advocacy every day. And we're going to make sure to make some resources available for folks who want to learn more about your work and about the legal issues that are raised when you're not providing these supports and you're discriminating against
Mhm.
individuals who are menstruating. So thank you.
Of course, thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone listening to joining me in saying these words, right, and helping to destigmatize it. Watching this is one step, right? Using the words and learning more about these protections is next up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.